Hello again, everybody. So this is the last day number 7, and we're going to finish up with a more well-known character, Bathsheba. Um, there's a lot of stuff that's been written and a lot of media that has been made about Bathsheba, movies, all kinds of stuff. Um, I imagine, if you're familiar with the story, that the first thing that comes to mind is, oh yeah, the scandalous woman who, slept on the roof, or not slept on the roof, bathed on the roof, and then, had an affair with David. But there's a lot more to her story, and perhaps some of you have read other things about Bathsheba. I do want to recommend a book to you. I have it right here. This is an amazing book. It's called A Lineage of Grace by Francine Rivers. And what it does is take you through all the women who are in the lineage of Jesus. And they're really interesting women. They're not necessarily those you would expect. They're foreigners. They're women who have gone through abuse or adultery, or it's like a host of, there's a former prostitute, So the women God chose to be in David's, not just in David's life, but in Jesus's lineage, were all these unexpected people that you wouldn't choose if you were probably writing the story. So Bathsheba is in this book. She is one of the women in the line of Jesus, and her story is one of redemption, and so it's a fascinating one to look at. Now, when I first wrote Bathsheba, I tried to make it so you didn't really know. Was she a big participant in the sin? Was she a victim? And then I ended up adding more to the story after I read this book, actually. So let's talk about her. First of all, if you want to read about her, you can find her in 2 Samuel 11 and 12, also in 24, and, no, I'm sorry, just 11 and 12, and then in 1 Kings 1 and 2, and then, of course, in the first chapter of Matthew, she's listed in that lineage of women. But Bathsheba comes into the scene first when David decides to stay home from battle, and he sees her bathing on the roof. He has her brought to him, and they are intimate. She becomes pregnant, and he has her husband brought back from battle. He tries to get him drunk, tries to basically send him home so that he can be intimate with his wife, so that he'll think the baby is his. That was David's first tactic, but then when that doesn't work, because her husband Uriah is too noble to do that, he has Uriah killed. He has him put on the front lines of the battle so that he'd be taken out. So, big sin, right? Basically a murderer and an adulterer. So Bathsheba is grieving. She loses a husband. And then the baby that she bears, that was David's, ends up dying because of David's sin. And because of this sin, the prophet Nathan comes to David and he says, look, you're going to have turmoil in your house because of this. All these problems are going to happen. The sword is never going to leave your house. And then we get all that stuff with Tamar and Amnon and Absalom taking over. So we definitely see that sword do its damage. But Bathsheba may have loved David. I think it's possible. And David obviously loved her very much. So they get married, and God ends up promising to Bathsheba to give her a son who would sit on the throne, and that's Solomon. And Solomon from the Proverbs, he was given this great wisdom, and he ended up having even more power and wealth than David. So we see Bathsheba on 2 occasions. We see her earlier on when she's suffering all these nasty looks and gossip from the other women who don't like her because of all the trouble that her situation has caused. And then we also see her later on when her son is finally being made king. And she, at that point, is seeing God's promise fulfilled for her. And And her only hope really is God. She doesn't have a lot of friends at first. She feels very alone. And she chooses to put her faith in God, and God blesses her. I know that's kind of a little bit of a vague storytelling, and there's a lot more to be seen in the show, and then of course as you read the scripture, and I definitely recommend that book. So let me leave you with some questions for Bathsheba. I mean, we all sin, right? We sin a lot, and we feel shame, and shame is the most terrible feeling. Um, do you think that God can redeem you so that you don't have to live with your shame? And there's clearly, teaching in Scripture that says a definite yes to that. I think that's something Bathsheba experiences. There's nothing too bad, nothing too gross, nothing too perverted that God can't make right. And Bathsheba, if she had been a willing participant, yeah, I'm sure she felt a lot of shame. But God redeemed her. God gave her a promise. She ended up being in the line of Jesus. Wow. That's grace, that's forgiveness, that's mercy, and redemption. And so that is something God offers to all of us. So yeah, what's in your life that you feel like God couldn't forgive? He can. He totally can. And maybe it's time to talk to somebody about that thing, or time to really choose to trust God and to give yourself over, to surrender. I'm going to get rid of this shame now. I'm going to turn myself in. So there's so much more we could talk about with Bathsheba. If you have comments, please feel free to write them. I know this is totally just scratching the surface, but I look forward to getting to share her with you guys tomorrow at the show. Take care till then. I'm really excited to meet everybody. So, bye, and thanks for coming on this journey with me.